Joe, show me your shirt, sir. What is that? I got some tiger vibes.
Tigers.
Cool.
My wife, my wife and I, some time ago, maybe embarrassingly long ago, went to Forever 21, and they have a section which I didn't know up until that day, and we were looking around, and I was like, "This shirt is ridiculous." She's like, "You should get it though." I was like, "It makes me look like a drug dealer." She's like, "It's kind of hot though." I was like, "All right, I'll get it." So,
So you've been wearing the drug dealer vibe shirt this whole time, huh? Is it a hoodie? Jacket?
well, no, it's really dumb because yes, it's a hoodie, but it's also like a collar shirt over top of the hoodie. But the hoodie, get this, the hoodie doesn't have sleeves. It's a sleeveless hoodie. So it's a
Weird.
sleeveless hoodie with a shirt over the top of it.
And they're like sewn together?
No,
Oh,
two
okay.
two separate things. I just wear them together because
Oh, okay, okay. All
that
right.
adds to the vibe. Yeah. So, yeah.
I've been playing video games lately, and this is my shirt that I got for my
Yeah.
birthday. It's like Zelda Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
I've been playing that game. I don't have a Switch. I have a Nintendo Wii U. And
Oh,
at some point I'd
you just
like to
got
get the
long.
new Tears of the Kingdom video game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did the Wii U come out? I didn't even wasn't even aware of that one.
It was after the Wii. It was like this halfway point between the Wii and the Switch. So it
Mhm.
has this screen controller, this screen about that big, and then controllers that are fused to it. So it
Mhm.
feels a lot like a Switch, but if you leave the room from the main console that's like connected to the TV, it has to have like
Mhm.
a indirect line of sight for it to work. So
Mhm.
it's like their half attempt. This is their attempt to do like a more portable game, but they needed like to share the resources with a beefier like
Oh,
computer attached to the wall with stuff.
yeah.
So it wasn't that popular apparently, but I got tons of games because they're
Yeah.
cheap now.
Yeah. My wife dug up her old Wii, like the
Uh-huh.
original Wii, the other
Yeah.
day. So we were playing lots of like Mario Kart and stuff for a while, which is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wii was a fun system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it still is, but it's not
Yeah.
the system. So
Yeah. That's cool.
yeah.
Someday, I think they're coming out with a Switch 2. I don't
Which
know if they have a name for it. I don't know that I don't think anything's been leaked like what it looks like yet. So,
Mhm.
but if I have enough money, it's not crazy, then maybe I'll get that.
It's a good idea. Yeah. You know.
Well, have
Um
you thought of anything that you wanted to talk about
um
or any thoughts
well,
from our last meeting?
yeah, I mean, I guess I had a couple of things. One of the things we talked about between our last conversation and now, just as kind of a revisit of our last conversation, I guess, was that when I was talking about that pastor that was also a criminal pastor, um, one of the things that I noticed that I didn't mention in the last conversation was that why I think that I mean, I really dug into the fact that I think people in general don't change. I do think that people can change and transform. And we both have changed our thoughts about a lot of things. So, but people who are psychopaths tend to not change. They
Mm-hmm.
tend to be be problematic no matter what. Maybe they're not out there murdering people. Uh, you know, but they tend to always be villains. They that's a that's a stripe that the leopard or not, a spot that the leopard can't change, so to speak. They're always going to be villains. If somebody's a psychopath, there'll be a villain in the church. There'll be a villain outside of the church. And the interesting thing about psychopathy is that even if somebody's predisposed to be a psychopath, it's not predetermined that they will end up doing really bad stuff.
Right.
They might just be a big jerk, you know. They might not end up like being a serial killer. A lot of it depends on their nurture. So there's a story about a famous neurologist who did a bunch of brain scans on
Oh
famous.
yeah.
You heard about this guy?
I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah, he did the brain scans on all of the murder.
Psychopaths.
Yeah, all the murderers and otherwise, really nasty criminals. And he found that there was a commonality of how their brain scans showed up. And then he did his own brain scan and was like, "Hey, I'm one of those guys."
Yeah.
And he's talking about it. He talks, he goes around and does TED Talks. So he found out that his brain is the same as these
Yeah.
groups and stuff. The difference, though, is that he was raised as an only child, and his parents were really, really nice to him. Like they
Mm.
loved him and took really good care of him because he was their only kid. He didn't have to share attention with any other kids, and so he just got all this love and support. So he's still a jerk. Like he's talking about how he's like really hard to be in a relationship with, and like just kind of like
I,
a
I think he more labeled it as self-centered than
yeah.
being a jerk, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, self-centered, a jerk, kind of. Yeah, 50 cents, half a dollar. Um, but he's not out there like, Ted Bundying it up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, there is nurture involved. I'm not saying that like any kid that's born with a sort of like brain scan that would or genetics that would indicate that they're going to end up being, you know, a villain is going to end up being a villain with a capital V. They might just be, a little bit hard to be in a
Mm.
relationship or something like that. But I guess what I'm saying is if by the time that they're 30 or whatever, chances are if they're out there robbing banks, you know, they're probably going to just keep robbing banks.
Mhm.
And again, like I think if if you um rob banks and then you decide, oh, I'm going to stop robbing banks because it's wrong. Great. But like, I'm not going to make that person in charge of the church if I'm like the
Mhm.
select, the
In
pastor.
charging of
Yeah. That person,
vulnerable people.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like for the same reason that like if I'm going to hire a counselor to be a mental health counselor, I'm not going to hire somebody who has like a criminal record. Um, I people do bad stuff as counselors without having criminal records. So it's like
Mm.
they're working with vulnerable people. People are telling them their intimate details of their lives. It's a position of a lot of power. You don't want somebody who tends to abuse power or tends to not respect the rights of others in that position. So I guess that's a more concise point of what I was trying to say earlier. Yeah. But I was New Year's morning, you know, um, and I was kind of like, ugh.
That's okay. It's funny.
Yeah.
Somebody on TikTok was like, "Is he drunk?" And I'm like, probably not, but whatever gets you talking in the morning."
Yeah, I'm not drunk. I was not drunk back then either. I just, people, I think it's just it's my vibe. I'm just very like, yeah. So that was one thought. Um, and then the other thought was I was thinking about, and this is maybe less of a return to our last conversation. Um, but I was thinking about God recently a lot, like conceptions of God.
Yeah.
And uh, I was thinking about the pagan conceptions of deities, and I've been learning a lot about this recently, and a couple of things. So I'm sure you've heard of Dionysus?
I have. It doesn't mean I remember what he did or what he is supposed to have done in the mythological realm of deities. I don't.
Or Bacchus, maybe Bacchus. So how about King Midas? Do you know that
Yeah,
story?
yeah,
Okay, so here's an interesting thing about that story, which I didn't know up until recently. It's inextricably linked with Dionysus. So the god in the story that grants King Midas the wish is
hmm
Dionysus.
Okay.
It's fun. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until recently. They just said he's granted a wish by a god, like within the versions of the story that I learned. He's granted a wish by a god. So, and the reason why he's granted a wish, and they don't tell kids this because they don't want them to follow this example too much, or it's kind of a mature story. But the reason why he's granted the wish is because he takes care of an acolyte of Dionysus, like a priest or a sage of Dionysus who gets too drunk. So the guy gets too drunk, and you know what people are like when they get too drunk, they need some care, throwing up, whatever. So he takes care and is hospitable to this acolyte of Dionysus, takes care of him when he's too drunk. And Dionysus is like, thank you. This is my man. You took care of him. I'm going to take care of you. And so he grants him a wish. Well, King Midas, is maybe a nice person, but he's also an idiot. So he's like, well, I wish that everything I would touch would turn to gold. So Dionysus is like, oh, I really wish you wouldn't wish that. He's like, but I want it. So he gives it to him anyway. Well, of course, the rest of the story, he like turns everything to gold. He accidentally turns his daughter into gold. Um, and then he's like really bummed out about it. And Dionysus comes back and it's like, he feels bad for him. And he said, so you go and wash yourself and you'll be
In the
cured of
river.
your power and you'll be able to undo the stuff that you did. So, but what I think is really interesting about that is like Dionysus is like a personal, is very much like a personal god in this case, that he has a relationship with this king. And also he kind of like forgives his bad decision. He like shows compassion and mercy. Um, which we tend to think of like Jesus as like a personal savior or personal God as being a very like Christian idea, if that makes sense. Like we tend to think of this as like, especially in Protestantism. I don't know about like in your churches that you grew up in, but in mine anyway, like this idea of it's not a religion, it's a relationship. You're not just
hmm
following codes, you're not just doing following these prescriptions. God is like it's like a personal relationship.
Yeah.
um but like the idea of this personal relationship with the God goes like pretty far back, right? But what I also think is interesting about it, Dionysus too, he what's the word, androgynous, like he's generally pictured as being fairly androgynous. I don't mean like like trans or non-binary so much as I mean like he is a man, but
Portrayed.
he has like long hair and a beard and has a very gentle expression. So I mean that's how we picture Jesus, right? Like
Hmm.
in the other thing about Dionysus is that he's the son of Zeus. He's the son of God. He's the son of like the chief god, right?
hmm
And he also dies. And Zeus rescues him by somehow like storing him in his leg. Who knows what that means? For a certain amount of time. And then he's resurrected. So Jesus is kind of like a little bit like Dionysus in terms of his story. But also he turns water into wine. And the other thing that's interesting about Dionysus is that he eventually became the Roman god Liber,
Hmm.
um, Liber, and they'd have Libertalia, which was like this like just giant, you know, party, lots of debauchery and stuff like that. And the the cult of Liber was very popular with women, and
Hmm.
Dionysus was also popular with women. I hope I'm getting all this right, but I mean, I know that Dionysus and Liber were both very popular with women, and also Liber was associated with coming of age, right?
Hmm.
So there's kind of like when you hit a certain point, that Liber was kind of like the god you pray to when you were in your adolescence sort of times, as you went from being a kid to being an adult. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting kind of like connections there, but also
Hmm.
differences, obviously some differences and connections. But Libra was associated and very popular with like the plebes, the common people. Um, so the Libertalia and the cults of Liber were actually at various times kind of, you know,
Marginalized.
marginalized by the upper classes because of the association with freedom,
Mm. Is that
people.
kind of where we get the name liberté or liberty?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Like freedom, uninhibited times, people having a party. And I mean, Dionysus is associated with wine and drinking. And Jesus turned water into wine. So I
Yeah.
think that there is some connection of like the people who wrote the Bible when they were writing the Bible,
Mhm.
they kind of wanted to make this connection
Yeah.
because all of them were former pagans, right? Like the Bible is written
Yeah.
in they were, I mean, I think there was Greek speaking Jews, but also I think like Luke was a Gentile, they think.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I'm not sure about John, but I think the other authors were Greek speaking Jews. I think, yeah, but I think Luke was a Gentile. So there's definitely some of that like imagery and those archetypes,
Yeah.
rattling around in the people's heads who wrote the Bible.
Yeah. Was this thought that you're thinking, was this based off of some book that you were reading, or what brought you to talking about these connections between these Greek gods and how we interpret Jesus in our theological framework? It could just be that you were thinking of it, but
I got sucked down an internet rabbit hole. Somehow Dionysus came up, and I was just reading the stories about Dionysus, and it was just like
mhm,
this, connection. I wish I could point
mhm.
you to a specific author. I'm sure
No, that's
others
fine.
point. I mean,
I'm
I know.
sure somebody has written a book about how the connections between uh, the cultural background, mythology, and how that plays a factor into the Christian and the gospel narratives. And I think I've come across things like that before in seminary. And one thing that I would like to mention here is that the whole concept of being a scribe or being somebody who knew how to write was a profession, like a deep profession that had a lot of like, it wasn't just like, once you're a kindergartner, you learn how to read. It was just like specific people knew how to read,
Mhm.
specific people know how to write. And it was a career, just like a car mechanic. You can work on your car, you can repair your car, but if you really want to get it done and done right, you go to a mechanic who has this as their job. And a lot of times, once it's serial careerized, if that's a word, um, they put it in their own framework of doing things. So they say, "Oh, you want me to write the story of Jesus? Well, let me tell you, you don't write a story just the way that it happened. That is for the common people. That is the word of mouth. That is something that you can pass on to your children with oral stories. No, we're going to write this, and we're going to write it like the Epic of Gilgamesh or something to that. Like, we're going to put this in a narrative where the front mirrors the back, and there's a sandwich in the middle, and there's an arc of, high and low, and we're gonna form this in a way that is worthy of putting in a binding." And so they do. And so, just like how the NIV was, the NIV version of the Bible was translated from Greek to English, but they handed that translation to English linguists
Mhm.
so that it would fit more in a flowy kind of a way in the way that we speak.
Mhm.
So the literalness was kind of yanked and the more like the way that we spoke, like in the 80s, was inserted. And so a lot of the specifics were tossed and we got this thing that was an amalgamation of um that a lot of different perspectives could use.
Mhm.
Um and we find that the specific words that might have been more helpful for different theologies, like, predestination or free will or things like that, were were put in more squishy words, and therefore a lot of the nuance, the specifics were just kind of tossed out. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the criticisms that gets leveled at the King James Bible, which I think is interesting, is that it's too literal. Like
Hmm.
they're just doing a super literal translation of the Bible. Um, and and I actually think it's a pretty good criticism because if you translate something super literally from like Mandarin using Google Translate, it doesn't mean anything because there's nobody to translate the translation.
Hmm. My friend, she is an interpreter. She's not a translator. Her job it used to be, she got a new one anyway, was in a clinic that often saw people from um the Spanish culture. And she had to interpret what they were saying because what they mean is different than what they say.
Right.
What the words, yeah, what the words mean is not what you're trying to convey. And so whenever say, "Oh yeah, she translates," no, I interpret.
Yeah.
And and uh
Totally.
and I was like, "Why do you need that distinction?" And she's like, "There's a reason."
Yeah. Yeah, like I think oh I was oh there's a language I was hearing about recently where they're like if they feel mad, they say my enemies are winning.
Oh,
You know, that's their expression for I feel mad about something. It's like
huh.
if you translated that straight across
Yeah.
without any sort of interpretation, that would be inaccurate. You know,
Yeah.
that would be unfair to what the person is saying. They're just kind of kidding around a little bit. You know, like they're
Right.
not that upset. They're just like, oh, my enemies are winning today.
Right.
I'm having a bad day, kind of thing. You know,
Yeah.
but it's not really like their
And
enemies aren't. You know,
it kind of makes sense. I smash my thumb with a hammer. Ah, my
oh, my
enemies are winning.
enemies are winning. Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Like they're happy. I'm not.
Yeah, ouch. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not as direct as saying, oh, ow, ow.
Yeah.
So,
I heard
I think stuff like that happens in the Bible all the time.
there was a TikTok video I just watched yesterday. He said in Tagalog and some other African languages, there's a specific script that you go by when you're like, "Good morning.
Mhm.
How are you?" Instead of "How are you?" I mean, they ask that, and then the response is supposed to be, "I am here," and then you can add to, "I am
Yeah,
here, but not happy about it," or "I am here and I'm having a great day."
yeah,
But the standard is "I am here." You can't
yeah.
lie about that.
I'm here.
I'm here.
That's funny. Yeah, yeah. Or like, I think there's a verse in the Bible where that it talks about a guy covering his feet,
Well, yeah.
and what it means is he's taking a piss. You know, like
Yeah.
that's a total slang, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not you have
Well,
to know the context, otherwise you just say
feet.
covered his feet.
Well, my son was asking about this, some other stuff. I'm like, son, anything can be turned into a euphemism. Anything. You know
Anything.
how a pencil could be used for a euphemism. He's like, what's a euphemism again? I mean, it means like private parts. And so if you're like, hey, I touched this guy's pencil, he would do that in school just to be silly. Not that he would
Right,
touch somebody's pencil, but he
right,
got what I meant when I was like, it's a euphemism. But if the teacher says, now class, get out your pencils, she's not saying reveal yourself. And he's like,
right. Yeah.
um, so yeah, there's a couple places in the Bible that were just like, and was it Ruth went and laid at the feet of Boaz or
Uh-huh.
something like that? Um,
Yeah.
while he was, drunk or whatever. And he woke up the next morning and was like, "Holy crap. What happened? I need
Yeah.
to make this right. Something happened last night. I don't remember."
Yeah, I was
Um,
wondering about that. Is that talking about what I think it's talking about?
yeah. Well, again, um, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? Because I asked one of my professors who, kind of digs around in the Greek and stuff, and I said, "So when it said he washed his disciples' feet, is that a euphemism for something else?" And he's like, "Sometimes the words just mean what the words say, and it's not something dirty. It's it's dusty, it's dirty. You wear sandals.
Yeah, totally.
There's
Yeah.
nothing hanky panky going on there."
Yeah.
That'd be awkward. If you want to be a leader, you have to go and wash other people's feet. Ew, no, Jesus. No, I wasn't talking like that,
Yeah.
disciples. Peter, get your mind out of the gutter.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, but I mean, like, I think what it got me thinking about is like I think Jesus was a real person, despite, I mean, part of what you were asking about, like who is written about this sort of thing, and there are mythologists, right? The
Mhm.
mythologist strand of thinking of literary or historical criticism that says
Mm,
Jesus never existed. The reason why we think Jesus never existed, and these people tend to be atheists, obviously, is because he's so much like so many myths. So they call
mm,
themselves mythologists because they say he's so much like myths. But I think it's backwards. I think that Jesus existed, and then people mythologized some aspects of his life. Not Jesus never existed. Um, therefore, people people mythologized this angel named Jesus and told stories about this angel named Jesus. That's what a lot of mythologists think. Nevertheless, because there's this mythology around Jesus and he gets compared to other figures from that time, and even like you're saying, like the writing style, they didn't just write down the oral traditions. They were like, let's make this into a narrative. And I think it's Luke that they describe as like a great person narrative. Like it's like the story of a great
mm,
person's life. So he writes it according to that genre, you know. Um, but nevertheless, there was a lot of ideas about what God could be like going around at the time.
yeah.
And some of those ideas have been passed on down to today through astrology.
Mm,
Talk about the the planets. The planets are described in terms of their characteristics, and that the characteristics go back to the characteristics of the ancient Greek gods. So
mm,
you can learn about how people viewed the Greek gods based on how they describe planets in astrology today.
mm, mhm,
So Venus, for instance, is the planet of love. So people would say like your Venus sign is says something about your love life, right?
mm,
Um, and then the different signs are associated with different Greek gods, right? So Taurus is associated with Venus. So Taurus people tend to be very, supposedly, right, tend to be very loving
mm,
and luxurious and steady. And so they have the association with Venus. Those are like Venus
mm.
characteristics. But Jupiter, the planet Jupiter, obviously named after
The God.
the god Jupiter, which was the Roman version of Zeus, right?
Mm,
And in astrology, Jupiter is the god of like jollity and expansion. And um, they call him the great benefic, which means he's the god of like prosperity and good times. And there's even a song or a symphony piece
mhm,
called Jupiter, bringer of jollity by Holst, which is very
Hmm.
nice, very good piece. Saturn, on the other hand, is typically associated with hard work, building something, like delays, challenges, the idea of like karma, sort of, if you do good things will happen to you. If you do bad things, then bad things will happen to you.
Hmm.
And so Saturn is like, in astrology at least, is associated with like discipline. And
Hmm.
he's considered malefic because people don't want to have to work. People don't want to have to deal with the hard aspects of life. So Saturn is kind of associated with the hard aspects of life, whereas Jupiter is associated with like party times.
Hmm.
You're being attacked by your.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get a good background with being so close.
Oh
But
yeah.
anyway.
I'll wait for a second. I was saying as you were being attacked by your picture. So yeah, so Saturn is kind of the god of difficult times, delays, working hard, karma. If you do good things will happen. If you do bad things will happen. If you're doing right, then you will be successful. If you're doing wrong, then everything will fall apart and you'll have disaster, sort of
Hmm.
thing. And and that and so, Saturn doesn't necessarily, in astrology, isn't necessarily always bad, but it's kind of like that's how astrologers see Saturn, right? It's kind of like, uh-oh, I hope that I've been living right. He sees you if you're sleeping, he knows if you've been awake, kind of thing. Like, uh, uh, are you on the naughty list?
Yeah.
Look out, look out. And I think it's really interesting because most people who like believe in astrology, as I've been learning about this, they don't believe that these gods are like literally real or whatever, but they still think that like as they spin around the sun and do their thing in the sky, that they have influence on our lives. But it goes back to paganism, and I guess that must have been because astrology was invented by the Greeks, right? It was invented by the ancient Greeks. Um, that must have been kind of what they thought about these different gods and
Hmm.
goddesses. Um, so, but I was thinking about this and I was thinking, like, what God do Christians worship? And I was thinking, you know, I haven't really thought about this very much, but I feel like, for the most part, the closest analog to the version of God that I would pray to would be Saturn.
Hmm.
Like going back to when I would go to church all the time at, you know, either a Nazarene or similar church. That was an interesting realization. The thought that God would be like the friendly God that would help me out, invite me to the party, welcome me, support me in like what I actually cared about was it was a kind of a novel idea to me.
Hmm.
Um,
To what extent to think that like there are other ideas for which you could imagine God, or what was the enlightening part for you?
Um, just that I felt like hard work, slogging through difficult times, trying to get as much good karma as you can by being a good person, putting in the work, working hard. Those are
So
those
what
are
I'm hearing you say,
all about. That's like what God cares about. That was the vision of God that I got from going to church. That was the overarching vision of God that I got from going to church.
so what I'm
And
hearing you
and
say
and
is
not only
that,
that, like if you screw it up, if you're a crappy person,
mm,
um, or you're not like on the straight and narrow, then in the bin for you, so to speak. Um,
mm.
it's very like, it's very closely associated with like the astrological idea of Saturn, but not very closely associated with the astrological idea of Jupiter.
So what does that make you feel? How does that make you reevaluate your belief structures, or does it?
It was kind of it made me feel very emotional. Actually, I mean, it still does, right? I think that the reason why American Christianity pushes that idea so hard is because I mean, if people believe that way, if they think of God in that sense and think that's what
Mhm.
God cares about, it enables, like, it really greases the wheels of society. Like, everybody's working
Mhm.
hard, everybody's like being the best possible person that they can be, and
Yeah.
doing it out of a sense of fear. It greases the wheels of capitalism, especially. I
Yeah,
mean,
and they've even noticed that historically Protestant and historically Catholic areas of Germany see a monetary difference because Protestants, they're like, if you don't work, you don't eat. You gotta work hard and God will reward you because working hard is what God approves of. And the Catholics are just like, you gotta believe the right thing. Belief is what it's all about. And they've noticed that in the Protestant areas, they have a greater GDP than those that are the Catholics. And it was because of that in-rooted cultural differences between the two theological frameworks.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes
I get
sense.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like, Protestants, God kind of looks like Saturn. I mean, I know there's differences, but the way that they see God, the things that they really focus in on are very, like, Saturnic. And I mean, I even described the guy that, that ran that church, not the criminal guy, but the guy that was the older guy who originally ran the church,
Hmm.
um, that I used to go to. He was very Saturnic, he was very, like, dour and serious and straight faced and, like, down to business and, like, let's read the Bible and are, you know, I'm not saying that that kind of person is bad, or that, like, um that that's a bad thing in society, if
Right.
people are working hard, if people are contributing and pulling together and trying to be good people. I'm not trying to argue that that is bad. However, I would say, I do think it can be used in less savory ways, if in a number of ways. I mean, one is that, if that's what God cares about, then it's almost kind of better not to be having a good time in life. It's almost better
Hmm.
to be struggling. So if you're struggling, you're doing it right. Like,
Hmm.
that's a convenient thing for somebody who's got lots of money and doesn't want other people competing for a piece of the pie to kind of
Yeah.
proliferate. So I think there's a lot of literature and a lot of movies and a lot of just general propaganda of, oh, the rich don't have it so good, you know. They aren't doing that great. They seem like they are, but you wouldn't really want that. You wouldn't really like that kind of thing. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, like
The
this.
rich have their own set of problems.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Or like, if you've read, or I haven't read it, but I've heard the synopsis of Atlas Shrugged, that they, by Ayn Rand, that they kind of, all the rich people all disappear all at once because they just get so sick of dealing with the burden of being powerful and rich. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I think that there's a lot of propaganda about that topic of, like, you don't really want that. Um,
Mm.
I think some of it is poor people trying to convince themselves, but I think some of it is also coming from the top of, like, eh. I watched a movie called Saltburn recently. Have you heard about that movie?
Not at all.
It's pretty it's pretty good and also pretty disturbing, but it's about British, upper class, like, high society, and a guy trying to get into it and how he struggles to get into it. It's kind of successfully, takes the rich, the upper classes down a peg. But I think that sort of self-effacing humor is part of the whole thing. You know what I mean? Like, why does this thing get made? Why is this thing popularized? Why, yes, it is kind of like taking rich people, or, upper classes down a peg, but at the same time, the whole system is based on the fact that, like, people kind of, like, accept it. You know what I mean? And I think that, a way to get people to accept it is to make it seem like it's good that it is this way, because, this is what God cares about, and rich people don't really have it that great, and all
Right.
this stuff. So it
Yeah.
it it kind of can it kind of slows or influences people to
Hmm.
slow the idea of social mobility or sharing resources or that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
I sound maybe radical or more radical than I'm trying to sound. What I'm really talking about is like psychologically and spiritually, I think that has consequences. Because part of the reason why I stopped going to church and why I was just like, forget this, is because I got so sick of hearing about how all God cares about is like the hard things of life. You know, everything is like, suck it up. Don't get what you want. Um, and to a degree, like, uh, there's poor and miserable and sad people out there. The most important thing you can do is take care of them. Nothing else really matters. I mean, this was a message that we definitely got at NNU. I mean, I
Huh.
was listening to, you know what I mean? Um, I was listening in chapel. I went to chapel a lot because I would go 3 days a week until I
And we
didn't
were
have,
supposed to. Yeah.
yeah. And then I would stop going for the rest of the semester because I got so tired of it. But like the main message that I picked up in chapel was like, how can you sleep warm in bed at night if there's other people hungry and cold in the world? Like your
Mhm.
role is to go out and take care of the world and make it a better place. And again, while that's great and all, and while I agree with that to a point, it's like we as individuals can't fix the problems that the systems make.
Mm.
And um, if we think that we have to suffer in order so that other people can be happy, or that we can't have the good things in life so that other people can be happy.
It's building another narrative that says that in itself is not true or potentially not true. Like the truth doesn't mean only one person can be happy. The truth could be that everyone could be happy, and we aren't preaching that as a possibility. Is that kind
Right.
of where what you're saying?
Kind of, yeah. Like life isn't a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
And I feel
Yeah.
like maybe the unintentional message of that, at least the NNU, they're trying to get us to be humanitarians. They're trying to get us to be good people, which is great. It's great. And like some of those people, um, sitting in chapel, just kind of spacing off, probably kind of like that message just kind of leaked into their brain. And then they went off to become business people. And maybe they were better business people and nicer to their employees than they would have otherwise been, so that's good. But I was listening. You know what I mean? I wasn't just kind of like sitting there like, what do I got next? And I was listening in chapel. Like I think if I tuned it out, it was like intentionally I would sit there and actually actively tune it out. But otherwise I was listening. I was like, is this a good message? Is this an actionable message? If you don't just kind of let it filter in one side of your brain of like, oh, I want to
Mm.
make a bunch of money, and like, oh yeah, but maybe I shouldn't be a crappy person in order to do that. That's one thing, right? But if you're like, oh, life is a zero-sum game. If I'm happy, it's because somebody else is miserable. Um, then that's a
I get
different.
that a lot. I've heard that a lot with people complaining about billionaires and them not paying their fair share. And I get it. There are multiple truths in this argument if it's an argument. Um like I've heard people say you can't be a billionaire without sucking the wealth from people below you. Like, how on earth are you supposed to make like $1 million a minute because you're asleep on the toilet and you're asleep or you're going to the bathroom. I remember as a kid, somebody was like, Shaq makes this many $1 million a year. That calculates to, every minute he's making like $15. So if he takes a 5 minute bathroom break, that's like $100 just to use the bathroom. And he shouldn't make that much. And here we are 30 years later or something, and they're calculating how much billionaires like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos make, and they're like, this is so unfair. And minimum wage workers are not earning what they should, and all this other stuff. Um, and I get that. Um, but also I know that like Elon isn't a millionaire because of the money that he's getting from cars, but he's a millionaire because of people like me who've divested of some of my stocks and put it into Tesla because he's doing good. And in the future, when I sell those stocks because other people have invested in that idea, then I get that money back. And so all of this money that I've put into that system, and he has a lot of stock because he invented the business, he could sell for later for actual money. But at the moment, he's broke. He doesn't actually have money. He has a portion of control of a business, and he broke until he sells that control. Like he basically doesn't have money. He can leverage the stock that he has to say, hey, banks, see all the stock that I have in a company that's worth X amount of money? Give me a loan, and the collateral I have are these stocks. So he gets a loan from the bank. Boom, he has like $250 million he can play with and pay his taxes, which he doesn't have to do because he doesn't have actual valuable assets like buildings. He has debt that he's accrued because of his assets of stock. And that is how, like, he doesn't actually have money. He has the potential for money. And so I don't want to like support him just because, oh, well, it's me, he doesn't actually have money, because he has a lot of power, and that's good enough. But we also don't need to bring out the guillotines just because he has power or just because he has like the potential for money. We should bring out the guillotines because they're jerks. Not, no, I'm actually not saying that. I don't actually like the idea. I really like algorithms on TikTok or YouTube, to be honest. I don't even like the idea of people saying, get out the pitchforks and guillotines. I hate that. Like, if I could, I'd turn off that violent part of my body and just be like, hey, we got to solve the problem of hate and and prejudice with love. That is the way to do things. And if we don't fight it with love, then it's just gonna then the problems are just gonna proliferate. You got to fight fire with water, not fire with fire in this particular case. Um, anyway, sorry,
Yeah.
went off on a tangent.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Yeah, France's revolution, I mean, in the long run, maybe not such a bad thing, but like in the short run, yeah, it went to some pretty dark places pretty fast. And then after that, they had Napoleon, and the Napoleonic Wars were no joke. I mean,
Well, if you look at Russia and the czars that they overthrew just to be, taken over by Stalin and some other pretty bad dictators.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Napoleon was kind of like reverse Hitler, right? Like the reason there's no slavery, I understand, is because of Napoleon. Because everywhere he went, he outlawed slavery. Like every country he took over, he was like, no slavery here. So he's kind of like the reverse Hitler. But still, like there's so many people died in the Napoleonic Wars. It's like a market event of like it was one of the biggest wars, biggest losses of life in human history. So like I don't know, like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. I'm not trying to like call for a revolution here, other than like I mean I think we could do better in America with our policies. That's all I'll say. Like as far as like how we treat people that are down and out. However, life is again like life not being a zero-sum game. Um, I realized at a certain point that I was like actively in my life, I was actively self-sabotaging or passively self-sabotaging myself because I had this view of God as like no fun, no games, no enjoyment, just work, just like taking care of people, just sacrificing yourself.
That's not very self-loving, is it?
Yeah, because if you're like um
Sacrificing self to build others up.
yeah, then you're and yet there's so much misery in the world. You're just actually adding to the sum total of the misery in the world. And that's not good. Like you're just kind of like or you're enabling people to be worse than they would otherwise be. So there has to be a balance. And I think like going so far towards the end of being like that eventually caused me to like reject the Christianity that I grew up with too, because I was like, I'm miserable and I'm not really making things better. I realized
Yeah.
like in my job, I don't make much money, but like it's not so much that it's not miserable in order to like do the stuff that I do to help people. It actually is, it builds me up too. So even in that, it's not a zero-sum game. Like helping people isn't this dour, like, oh, we have to lower ourselves and be, have crappy lives in order to help, the less
Right.
fortunate. It's like I can have a good life while I'm doing this. That they're not mutually exclusive. And some of those people that we resettle through our resettlement agency, like they end up having really good lives because they come here. So it's totally not a zero-sum game. It's like a
Yeah.
rising tide floats all boats, I mean that old stereotype. But just
Mhm.
the idea that like God is like on your team. He's here to make your life better and like increase your enjoyment and like welcome you to the party and like be interested in the sorts of things that make you emotionally feel better is a really not a very Christian idea from the kind of Christianity that I was raised with. Um, Maybe other versions of Christianity, but not the one that I was raised with. And so I can see why it generates a lot of wealth because everybody's like, oh, I got to get out there and grind. But like you could have like a good work ethic without that like weird shame and guilt stuff. And I think like it did make me feel emotional to think about like a God that actually loves me versus loves what he could get from me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what I've been thinking about. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
What I was thinking along in similar veins, I think there's the type of Christianity, especially in evangelicalism, that runs in similar veins, not with the work ethic sort of a thing or like the grinding sort of a thing, but the whole self-worth kind of a thing. They really emphasize the original sin aspect of theology, where, hey, we are built broken and
Mhm,
therefore we can't do anything good on our own, and God has to fix it. And then so that kind of a mindset is has the effect of I can't do anything right and God can't do anything wrong. I have to praise him for the good and I have to confess because of my brokenness. And a lot of songs that people sing are, oh, woe is me, I'm a terrible sinner, like Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like
mhm,
me,
yeah,
just like this whole like I'm a terrible person sort of a
mhm,
thing. And we kind of know, I mean, the generalities in psychology is you can't shame a person into healing. You can't shame, you can't belittle, you can't beat a person into doing better. You have to love them and encourage them and give them room to flourish.
mhm,
Um, it goes like with yelling at your kids, it goes with like spanking your kids, it goes with like um bosses who do similar things, leadership, all of the like leadership books and parenting books, they basically say don't shame, don't belittle, don't hound, don't spank, because when you do, it forces them in the opposite direction. It's all about psychology. And I'm like, if God made us, he knows this. So surely God is not the kind of a person, if he has a personhood about him, is the kind of a person that would shame us, that would belittle us, that tell us that we're horrible people. He would want like if healing, if wholeness, if what it takes to build the kind of a kingdom that we're talking about, the kingdom of God being all ponies and flowers and light is supposed to exist in this world. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. If that's going to happen, it's not going to be done by telling us that we're horrible and awful people. It's going to come through the opposite. So I've been thinking about that sort of thing lately. And
yeah,
it's in similar veins, it just not the whole grinding thing, but the whole positive aspects of how God views people, or how I imagine God should or does. I don't know. Um, I had a interesting experience with my marriage counselor. I am making a TikTok video about it. In my TikTok video, I basically say, as the hook to draw people in, my marriage counselor told me in a private one-on-one session that if I was to choose to get a divorce, that he would be in full support of me. And like, what? That's crazy. Like, why would you say that? And well, it was in the context of me feeling really bad about me having daydreams of what if I was to get a divorce, or what if I was to get, my wife should leave or die or something like that. And then feeling really judgmental about me even having those imaginations and thoughts. And so he just wanted to provide the opportunity, the space to say, hey, this is a judgment-free zone. This is a place for you to feel like you have somebody on your team and that you're supported. And any decision that you make would make sense given where you are. And even if you should choose to do something that didn't make sense in the past, might make sense now, I would fully support you. I was just like, that seems like really irresponsible for a marriage counselor to say, like that I would be in full support of you if you were to choose to get a divorce. I'm like, that's crazy. But I just sat there and I'm like, I see where he's going with this. Like I see it. I see it on his face, and I've seen it in some other examples where I just feel bad about something. It's like, oh, totally feel you. That makes total sense. And I can tell why you would be really angry with your spouse. And I'm kind of angry with her too about some of the things that you've mentioned. I'm like, why are you telling me these things? Like you should be saying, chill out. Like it was a misunderstanding. And I'm like, like even I know this. Like there's some need for some judgment here. And he's like, no, man, this is a space. So I realized that like he's practicing unconditional love. He's practicing a space in which there can be healing through understanding. And so I made this whole like little TikTok video to describe that weird feeling that I had of just feeling like it's very irresponsible and negligent almost to give that space of unconditional love. But I questioned him about it like the next time we met, and he's like, "Yeah, there's actually like a name for it. There's like a psychologist that says like this is the way to bring healing." And like it has a name and it has a um yeah, like
Unconditional
this
positive regard.
yeah, unconditional positive regard, exactly. And so it's like a method that he uses for his counseling. And so he told me a little bit about it and we nerded out a little bit. I'm just like, "Oh man, it's good." It feels really weird to be in those situations where, I've occasionally given myself grace and understanding in some aspects of unconditional love, but to feel it from somebody else, it feels really weird. And so imagining God doing that to us is a completely different vibe and something that I think we as Christians need more of to bring healing and the kind of world that we imagine and want to have in our life and society. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if Christians looking at trans people, it's been like, you feel like God created you that way. Okay, probably, huh? Like, I don't know. I didn't make you. Imagine if they were like about politics in general, like where you are coming from politically. I don't see it, but like, tell me about the reasons why why you feel that way. Oh, that makes sense. Like, not that not that you have to agree with, but like just like holding people, like giving people grace for like they are being the way they are because of the way that they were raised or because of the life circumstances that they had
Hmm.
or their innate, the way their brain works, the way they were born.
Hmm.
um it's why like I don't get mad about psychopaths, you know what I mean? Like I don't think they should be pastors, but I don't get mad about them. I just think that we have to protect our society from people like that, like
And
from
not
the
putting them in leadership positions.
yeah, and not putting them in leadership position. Like we have to keep, our communities safe from like the Ted Bundys of the world, not put them in leadership positions and keep an eye out for them. But I don't get mad about it. It's the same reason I don't get mad about volcanoes. It's a force of
Mm.
nature. These people are forces of nature. And I'm not saying that they can't ever have any change, but again, I don't think that they do. But anyway, I guess my point is like, if you see humanity that way, that even like the hardest to deal with people are simply just functioning according to what they think is best, then you actually can have like grace and understanding and like hold people in positive regard, and you actually end up with a more harmonious society. I mean, I think this is like right now it's 2024, where people are talking about like Civil War II and stuff, like it's and like, if Trump doesn't get elected, we're gonna, whatever, or like if Biden doesn't get elected, we're gonna go out there and fight, if we practice that like unconditional positive regard more with each other and felt more like we're all on the same team, imagine what it would be like being in America right now. I understand there's reasons for not, but I do think some of it is just comes back to, if God values like hard work and like playing by the rules and doing everything right, and various flavors of that, that's all God cares about. Anybody who's not totally going with that program in the way that you think they should is going to be a pariah automatically for you. And I have felt that personally, internally for a really long time, but just like the idea that maybe like I'm not like going against God by thinking that or feeling that way, like not just thinking it, but like emotionally feeling it was a different one for me.
Hmm.
So, yeah, which I think is I mean, it's a bummer. Like I think it says a lot because what people believe about God says a lot about the way they are and what they value and
Yeah.
what they're gonna do.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why I'm trying to reset my mind and find different opportunities for how I believe and what I believe about God. Because um I just need to have a different perspective based on how I was raised and form my own thoughts.
Yeah,
Which is why we're talking, because it helps with that.
yeah, yeah. I like I would never say to somebody like don't be a Christian anymore. Or like, like it's all fake, sky daddy, blah blah blah. I don't even think that. You know what I mean? Like I feel like militant atheism is just like the same, it's like the same head of the coin. Like I feel like the Christians almost need the militant atheists to have like an enemy, and the militant atheists need to have like Bible believing born again Christians as an enemy, so they can throw up the straw man, knock it down. You know what I mean?
I just feel like it's good to talk with you because I get another perspective on spiritual things and a broader perspective and something like to chew on the gristle of forming new ideas and new perspectives. So I really enjoy our conversations, sometimes even if it doesn't come to any grand conclusions. But just talking about it is really helpful and I enjoy it.
Same. Yeah. Well, and thanks for like giving me like a opportunity to share what's going on with me, like spiritually or whatever, because I don't have many friends who are like open-minded enough to either think that talking about spirituality is interesting or are open-minded enough to be like, well, what I was taught when I was a kid maybe could use some addendums.
Yeah.
I don't really have like I think you're my only guy friend that I could think of that actually is somewhere in that middle. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Could be wrong.
Yeah.
I don't have
Well,
a
my
lot.
my my pastor surprised me. I say my pastor, yet I'm like, if I was to go to a different church or to not attend this one, like it wouldn't hurt my feelings. I'm like distancing myself in a lot of ways because I'm ready to go. Not because I don't like the pastor. I like the pastor. I even like the people. It's just I'm
Yeah.
tired of doing church, doing things the way that I have because I've been hurt and need something different. Let's just leave it at that. But my pastor surprised me this last Sunday. He's like, "Hey, I see I've been really enjoying your YouTube videos." And I thought, yeah, like the ones I did like a year ago or like 9 months ago. He's like, and I said, "Yeah, yeah, I'm doing them." He's like, "Yeah, but I didn't see like a consistent pattern. Are you like doing them every month or every week?" And I'm like, "I don't know, my conversations with Joe." And he's like, "Yeah, those are really interesting." I'm like, "What? Really? Like, I didn't think anybody liked those." And he's like, "No, no, it's really interesting." I said, "Well, we're kind of just doing it whenever we can, but we might be doing it once a month. We'll see." And he's like, "Okay, okay. I kind of like him." And then he left because it was a Sunday morning and he had stuff to do. But I was like, "Really? That's kind of cool."
Yeah. Weird. Well, that's that. I mean, that's not as weird as I would have thought. It was weirder, like maybe like 5 years ago. But like the more like I've learned about this sort of thing, like the more that I've learned about like pastors and how they actually think about stuff because of their education. I'm like,
Mm. If
anyway,
they've
that's
had a good education,
yeah,
sometimes there's a lot of people, including our leadership, that don't have a broad understanding of stuff, and we just kind of roll our eyes. You know, if we've been to seminary, we're just like, "Why are these guys in leadership?" Like, hi, you know.
right. But it's interesting. I mean, it's that's like a whole nother conversation. So maybe next time we can talk about that one.
I have a whole nother conversation right up here on the wall, like just about the frameworks for how we understand God and God's relationship to the universe. Like, let's see if I can. I'm not gonna go off into the spiel because I know we have to like
Yeah.
go any minute, but I have like um this concept of a god as a theism and deism and pantheism, and then like my own concept of like, what if the universe is a book or a movie that God is creating, so it's not necessarily a part of himself, but it is a part of himself because it's in his mind, and like the bookshelf of like all these potential universes are a concept of like what's in his or her, the divine's
Mhm.
mind. And so, like, is the universe formed from God? Well, is a book that I have formed from my cells? No, but it's definitely a part within me. And so when you have the book in your hands and you read it and it's a part of you now, it's a part of me that's in you and it's shared. And I'm like, I like metaphors. They're very squishy and it can sometimes really help because like this whole concept of like, is God the universe or is God apart from the universe? Is And I'm like, what about an author writing a book? Like, it has a beginning and an end and it's set, but the characters don't know it. Like, so like the
Yeah.
whole concept of the Matrix and simulation theory, like it works in my mind anyway. Like with this whole, I think the metaphor of God having written the concept of the universe, I dig that. But I need to talk about it with you next time on our next episode with Forrest
On
and
our next,
Joe.
yeah, our next episode of Forrest and Joe. That'll be great. Yeah, next month in March. So
Okay,
cool.
cool, cool.
Cool. Well, have a good rest of your weekend and a good month until I talk to you again.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Talk to you later.
Of course. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.